Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvajikacharya Ashtotar to Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhakti-vedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai. ISKCON BBT founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvajikacharya Ashtotar to Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavindi ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta-vrinda ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Okay. On this 13th day of February 2023 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti-Vedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in chapter 12, entitled Devotional Service, page 512, unless you have a special book, which is, and it's verse 5 of this chapter. There you go, bottom of the page. Okay, so we'll do word by words first, and then get the pronunciation. Klesho dikataras tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta higatir dukkam dehavadbir avapyate Klesho dikadatas-tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hikati dukkam dehavadbir-avapyate Klesho dikadatas-tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hikatir dukkam dehavadbir-avapyate klesho dikadatas-tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hikatir dukkam dehavadbir-avapyate. Rasika. Klesho dikadatas-tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hikati dukkam dehavadbir-avapyate Klesho dikadatas-tesham
avyakta sakta chetasam
avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta higati dukkam dehavadbir-avapyate. Roscoe. Klesho dikadatas-tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hikati dukkam dehavadbir-avapyate. Try. Klesho dikadatas-tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hikati dukkam dehavadbir-avapyate. Klesho dikadatas-tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hikati dukkam dehavadbir-avapyate. Antonella. Klesho dikadatas-tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hikati dukkam dehavadbir-avapyate. Go. Klesho dikadatas-tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hikati dukkam dehavadbir-avapyate. You look like you were doing pretty good. Give it a try. Klesho dikadatas-tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hikati dukkam deha vadbhiravapite. Okay. I'm just going to read through the word by words myself. You can read along. Kleshaha, trouble, adhika taraha, very much, tesham, of them, avyakta, to the unmanifested, asakta, attached, chetasam, of those whose minds, avyakta, toward the unmanifested, he certainly gatahi, progress, dukkam, with trouble, deha vadbihi, by the embodied, avapite, is achieved. Okay. For those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested, impersonal feature of the Supreme, advancement is very troublesome. To make progress in that discipline is always difficult for those who are embodied. Purport. The group of Transcendentalists who follow the path of the inconceivable, unmanifested, impersonal feature of the Supreme Lord are called jñāna-yogīs. And persons who are in full Krishna consciousness, engaged in devotional service to the Lord, are called bhakti-yogīs. Now, here the difference between jñāna-yoga and bhakti-yoga is definitely expressed. The process of jñāna-yoga, although ultimately bringing one to the same goal, is very troublesome. Whereas the path of bhakti-yoga, the process of being in direct service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is easier and is natural for the embodied soul. The individual soul is embodied since time immemorial. It is very difficult for him to simply theoretically understand that he is not the body. Therefore, the bhakti-yogi accepts the deity of Krishna as worshipable because there is some bodily conception fixed in the mind, which can thus be applied. Of course, worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his form within the temple is not idol worship. There is evidence in the Vedic literature that worship may be saguna or nirguna, of the Supreme possessing or not possessing attributes. Worship of the deity in the temple is saguna worship, for the Lord is represented by material qualities. But the form of the Lord, though represented by material qualities such as stone, wood, or oil paint, is not actually material. That is the absolute nature of the Supreme Lord. A crude example may be given here. We may find some mailboxes on the street, and if we post our letters in those boxes, they will naturally go to their destination without difficulty. But any old box, or an imitation which we may find somewhere, but which is not authorized by the post office, will not do the work. Similarly, God has authorized representation in the deity form, which is called Archa Vigraha. Excuse me. Archa Vigraha. The Archa Vigraha is an incarnation of the Supreme Lord. God will accept service through that form. The Lord is omnipotent, all-powerful. Therefore, by his incarnation as Archa Vigraha, he can accept the services of the devotee, just to make it convenient for the man in conditioned life. Now, when Prabhupada uses the word man, he means human being. It's not sexist here. So for a devotee, there is no difficulty in approaching the Supreme immediately and directly. But for those who are following the impersonal way to spiritual realization, the path is difficult. They have to understand the unmanifested representation of the Supreme through such Vedic literatures as the Upanishads. And they have to learn the language, understand the non-perceptual feelings, and realize all these processes. This is not very easy for a common man. A person in Krishna consciousness, engaged in devotional service, simply by the guidance of the bona fide spiritual master, simply by offering regulative obeisances unto the deity, simply by hearing the glories of the Lord, and simply by eating the remnants of foodstuffs offered to the Lord, realizes the Supreme Personality of Godhead very easily. There is no doubt that the impersonalists are unnecessarily taking a troublesome path with the risk of not realizing the absolute truth at the ultimate end. But the personalist, without any risk, trouble, or difficulty, approaches the Supreme Personality directly. A similar passage appears in Srimad Bhagavatam. It is stated there that if one ultimately has to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this surrendering process is called bhakti, but instead takes the trouble to understand what is Brahman and what is not Brahman, and spends his whole life in that way, the result is simply troublesome. Therefore, it is advised here that one should not take up this troublesome path of self-realization, because there is uncertainty in the ultimate result. A living entity is eternally an individual soul, and if he wants to merge into the spiritual whole, he may accomplish the realization of the eternal and knowledgeable aspects of his original nature, but the blissful portion is not realized. By the grace of some devotee, such a transcendentalist, highly learned in the process of jñāna-yoga, may come to the point of bhakti-yoga, or devotional service. At that time, long practice in impersonalism may also becomes a source of trouble, because he cannot give up the idea. Therefore, an embodied soul is always in difficulty with the unmanifest, both at the time of practice and at the time of realization. Every living soul is partially independent, and one should know for certain that this unmanifested realization is against the nature of his spiritual blissful self. One should not take up this process. For every individual living entity, the process of Krishna consciousness, which entails full engagement in devotional service, is the best way. If one wants to ignore this devotional service, there is the danger of turning to atheism. Thus, the process of centering attention on the unmanifested, the inconceivable, which is beyond the approach of the senses, is already expressed in this verse. As already expressed in this verse, should not be encouraged at any time, especially in this age. It is not advised by Lord Krishna. Om Jnana Timurandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So, thank you all for coming. Looks like we have some new faces here tonight. Thank you. So this is the 12th chapter. It was just the beginning of the 12th chapter, more or less. We've read up to 5 verses out of 20. And this verse is all about devotional service, bhakti-yoga. The Bhagavad Gita begins with basic information for those who are spiritually inclined, those who are curious about matter, spirit, God, things like that. And the first lesson is that we ourselves, our identity, is not material. The bodies that we inhabit are one of very, very many that we've been through. The process of transmigration of the soul. The soul, or Atma, or self, is purely spiritual. And we can intuit that. Krishna gives a certain analogy or lesson in text 13 of chapter 2, where he says, if we just meditate or if we just think about our own lives, the verse goes like this in Sanskrit: Dehi no smin yata dehe kaumaram yovanam jara tata dehantara prapti dhiras tattva namuyate. And what it means is this, is that the living being, that's us, each one of us, we have different ages. All of us can remember back, I remember like 5 years, when I was 5 years old, I have a distinct remembrance of riding this tricycle. And that's about all I could remember from that time. But I was there, much smaller, obviously. And we all have been 5 years old. We've been 10 years old, 15, 20. And each of those embodiments, if you will, our body is a little different. And gradually, the body becomes quite different, right? I'm much different than I was when I was 40, 50, 60 even. So the body is constantly changing. That's something every mother knows. The child is growing. That's good. You want that to happen. Which means the body is changing. So the bodies we have now are radically different from the bodies we had 25 years ago. Who can deny it? But we're the same person. So what is it the same? What is it that has not changed? What has not changed? Practically everything, even the scientists say, the cells in all of our organs, gradually they also interchange, and we have new cells growing all the time. So what has not changed is called the Atma, or the self, the true self. And the lesson is encapsulated nicely in one verse. Jayate mriyate vakadacha nayam bhutva vitavanabuya. Ajo nityak shashvitoyam puraro nahanyate hanamane shirere. Which simply means, for the soul, for the person, that's each of us, there is no birth, there is no death. None of us here in this room are going to die. But all of our bodies are going to die. Just like an old car, eventually it dies, and you have to junk it. Body's a very, 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 very complicated machine. Who can deny it? And eventually something goes wrong, either from some outside influence or just old age or whatever it is. Okay, but it's a different phenomenon that you're facing if you know that you are not going to die. Now there is empirical evidence for the eternality of the soul. First of all, at this point in time, I remember back in the 70s when these were first starting to become known, these near-death experiences that people have in the hospital, oftentimes. They have the heart patient has a heart attack, all the doctors and the nurses run in there. I used to work in a hospital, I know, the machine, the electric machine, the defibrillator, all these things. And they're working, and meanwhile the person is practically not even alive. And sometimes, occasionally, the person who is revived, of course, he would say, "Wow, I was watching the operation. I remember this doctor came in the room," and so forth like that. It happens. There are, and even more telling, there are children, somehow or other, most of them are in India, but not exclusively, who will say, as soon as they can speak, they say, "You're not my mother. I was so-and-so in this town that's just maybe 50 miles away." And they know the names and things. So there's this one doctor named Ian Stevenson. He was working in the 70s, 80s. He's probably dead now. He wrote a book, something like 32 instances suggestive of reincarnation. And he went and he investigated the claims of these children. Okay, you say that there was this person, and he trudged off to the other village, and sure enough, it was confirmed. It was accurate. So sometimes you do. Now, I don't think anyone in this room can tell me they can remember anything in their past life. Is it possible you remember? You do.
I also had a death experience.
Oh, okay, you had a near-death experience.
Yeah.
Those are the more common. And so you were observing, right? You were able to tell.
So like a column of light, and it's complicated.
Yeah. So the point is that there is some empirical evidence, but there's all kinds of evidence from what we call the Shastra, the scripture. And that's the first lesson in the devotional service, or in yoga in general. Now you can see, welcome, thanks for coming. See if you can get them some books. Oh, they're getting? Okay. How that changes everything. Because in our lives, we have certain goals. Right, you go up and so forth, and okay, I want to get into a good school, and I want to get married, and so forth. And sometimes you achieve them, sometimes you don't. But if you look at the long view, right, whatever you're going to achieve in this life, suppose you become successful, you're financially okay, and you have a nice family, okay. But still, it's temporary. We ourselves are eternal, and so our goals for improvement, for aspiration, should also be on the eternal level. And that's what Krishna speaks of here. Here he's talking about the two different kinds of realization. In India, this everyone knows about this, mostly. Those who are what we call impersonalists, they say that the absolute truth, the source of everything, the final goal for the soul, is to merge into Brahman. Brahman is a common word in Sanskrit. It means the great, the source of everything, the supreme reality. And the first thing you learn in the Hare Krishna is that we're all Brahman. This is where Aham Brahmasmi. We're all spirit, meaning that we're never born, we never die, with pure consciousness. But because we're minute particles of spirit, we have a tendency, we in this world, to be covered by material energy and to identify ourselves with these bodies and the mind. But the bodies and the mind, this one of many, many. So as devotees practicing bhakti-yoga, we change our view of who we are, of what the absolute truth is, and we try to reawaken our original relationship with that absolute truth. Now, what is that absolute truth? The big revelation is that he's a person. It's a person. It's not a white light. It's not just undifferentiated spirit. It's not even the presence of God in the heart, but it's the Supreme, what Prabhupada dubbed the Supreme Personality of Godhead, called Bhagavan. So this is a radical departure from empirical science. But there's another kind of science, a spiritual science, that is revealed to those who practice not just bhakti-yoga, but any kind of yoga seriously. In the 6th chapter, Krishna talked about what's called jñāna-yoga. Dhyana means meditation. Oftentimes, yoga will mean okay, you know, the active yoga, the yoga for health. That's the most popular, and people would understand. Yes, yeah, there's a yoga studio right near where I live, and I used to go there or whatever, you know. And I used to practice that. That's how I started. I had no idea for any of this philosophy. And it's very healthy. It's stretching, bending, standing on your head, all of that. It helps the body, there's no question. But it's just one aspect of the dhyana yoga, or called ashtanga yoga, which means eightfold yoga, mentioned in the 6th chapter. But the whole purpose is to detach oneself from all of the hurly-burly of the outside world, and your mind and senses being absorbed in the pleasures and pains, and to withdraw, usually to a quiet, sacred place. That's why the Himalayas, you know, somewhere, or your own quiet place that you've arranged, and to sit and try to simply control the mind, withdraw it within, and see the Lord in the heart. This is another reality that Krishna has spoken about, and we'll speak about more in the next chapter, is that the Supreme Consciousness is with us at all times, although we may not see that Supreme Being or understand His presence. But he says in this Bhagavad Gita in the 15th chapter, Sarvasya Chaha Mridisannivishto. It really means heart. I am situated within the heart of everyone, not just human beings, also animals. Wherever there's a conscious being, the Lord is there. And He's giving inspiration, how to act, how not to act. When we talk about the conscience, where you're going to do something, say, no, I feel I shouldn't do it. That reluctance, that little voice in you, it's not good for you, and so forth. That's the voice of the super soul within the heart. And the idea behind bhakti yoga is that we want to have a more explicit relationship and defined relationship with that Supreme. And therefore we listen to, what does the word Bhagavad Gita mean? Who can say? Go ahead.
Spiritual song.
No, Bhagavad Gita. Song of God. Yeah, Song of God. Bhagavan is a word for God, meaning He who possesses all opulences, such as beauty, wealth, strength, fame, knowledge, and with all of that, detachment. Supremely detached. That's another opulences. So this is not something I made up. It's not something that was recently concocted. There is a long line of realized souls who have realized through the practice of bhakti yoga, which centers on the meditation of sound, specifically the mantra. This particular mantra, there are many others. It's composed of names of God. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. And the great acharyas, our spiritual master Srila Prabhupada, he was a realized soul, and he came to America in 1965. He was elderly at that time. His spiritual master, 40 years earlier, in 1922, and after that, he encouraged him, he instructed him, try to give this science to the West, to outside of India, because it's well known in India, but it's much needed everywhere. And he tried, but even just getting out of India was difficult, because he was a mendicant, he was a sannyasi, he didn't have any money. But he was able to finally, at age 69, to get a free passage on a cargo ship to America. You can imagine an elderly man, not in the best of health, on one of those cargo. They're not designed for passengers. It was a rough passage. He made it to America, New York. No money, a couple of contacts, but great faith and determination in his mission, that he had the backing of the Lord and his spiritual master and all of the great souls who came before him. And by amazing effort and help from all sources, all kinds of sources, he was successful. And this movement has grown all over the world. Why? Because it's natural. It actually puts you in touch with Krishna, with God, and you find a whole different level of satisfaction and peace and bliss in your life. I've been doing this for 75, I'm doing it for 75, not quite. Doing it for 50 years, I'm 75 years old. I don't want to exaggerate. But I can honestly say that in many ways I'm in the same spirit I was when I joined at age 25 in 1973. Those days I could dance for hours. You know, now if I can get a few jumps off the floor, I'm in good shape. But the same mantra is there. But the thing is, it doesn't grow old because it doesn't depend on the body. The body is going to do what it's going to do. But if you're in touch with the spirit, you have a spiritual identity, and it's very enlivening. And the amazing thing is, because when you think about it, no matter how strong or rich or beautiful or whatever you are in this life, by the force of time, it's all taken away, and ultimately everything's taken away by death. You go somewhere, who knows where, and your money stays here, your reputation stays here, and you forget everything. But if you make some spiritual progress, that's with you. You take up all that in your next life. You know, you get born in a family, you get in a situation where you'll again continue to progress. So you don't lose anything. But in material affairs, your progress, you lose everything. It's taken away from you. Who can deny it? Krishna says, Mrityu sarvaharaschaham. He says right in the 10th chapter. But as death, I take everything away. So, here Krishna is speaking about, we just started this chapter, and Arjuna asked the question, which is better? Which are considered to be more perfect? This is text 1. Those who are always properly engaged in your devotional service, or those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifested? And Krishna answers as explicitly as is possible to do. The Supreme Lord said, those who fix their minds on my personal form and are always engaged in worshiping me with great and transcendental faith are considered by me to be the most perfect. So this is what bhakti-yoga means. It means reawakening as a personal relationship with the Supreme Person. And we should know that one of the qualities of that Supreme Person, there's a book called the Vedanta Sutra. Vedanta Sutra encompasses the essence of all Vedic wisdom. Sutra means aphorism. I'll give you a couple examples. The very first sutra, Atato Brahma Jigyasa, that's the whole sutra. And what it means, notice that word Brahma is in there, Brahman. It says, now therefore, now how do you begin a book with the word therefore? Therefore usually is at the end of an argument. But the point is, now therefore, having reached the status of a human being, you should inquire into Brahman, the absolute truth. Now what is that absolute truth? Second sutra. Janma-yasya yataha. Means that the source from which everything has emanated. Janma means birth. And the Adi means etc. That's entity from which everything emanates, who sustains everything and ultimately destroys everything and brings it back into non-manifestation, and which it will come out again. There's a periodic creation, maintenance, and destruction of the universe. This is a creation, maintenance, and destruction of our own body, right? We're living a certain amount of years. So that's the mission of human life, is to inquire into that source of everything. Not to look at all the relative things, how can I increase my pleasure here and avoid the pain here, and dualities. Because ultimately you're frustrated in that. It all simply turns to dust as you're approaching the end of your life, no matter what you've got. But if you have some spiritual assets, because you've inquired and you've practiced some bhakti-yoga, then that will stay with you and will help you in your next life to continue the revelation. So Krishna says that the personal is the most is best. And then he says, and here's the situation with the aksharam. Aksharam means that which is unmanifest, which is invisible, which has no varieties. But those who fully worship the unmanifested, that which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all-pervading, the inconceivable, the unchanging, the fixed and immovable, the impersonal conception of the absolute truth, by controlling the various senses and being equally disposed to everyone, such persons engaged in the welfare of all, at last achieve me. They achieve them when they give it up and they become bhakti-yogīs. That's how they achieve it. You can't God will reveal himself in proportion to our sincere service. That's a verse in Bhagavad Gita also. So and there are records of some impersonalists in the Srimad Bhagavatam who gave up the impersonal endeavor. They were highly realized souls, not at all attached to this world. But eventually they gave that up for the personal relationship with Krishna. Why? Because it's a question of the standard of happiness. The standard of happiness for impersonalists is that there's the absence of any tinge of pain. They're merged into the absolute. There's no physical body. There's simply pure consciousness. And forgive me for those who've heard it before, but it's like the sensory deprivation chamber. Isn't it something like that? Where you can go and you get in the water, you lie there at perfect temperature, and somehow there's buoyancy, and you just, what a relief, you know. But how long can you stay in there? At a certain point, oh my God, I got to go to work, or something, and you have to leave that. And that's just what happens with the impersonal realization. Even if you are able to merge, and you can stay there for years and years and years, but it's not fulfilling because that's not who we are. Don't we feel ourselves, even though we should know we're not the body, but we also feel that we're persons, right? We have the likes and dislikes, and we want to engage. Now, we don't know how to do that wholesomely on the spiritual level, but still, that intuition is correct. We are eternal persons, but we just don't know the nature of that personality. And bhakti-yoga helps us to rediscover that. What is our actual relationship with God? And there's a spiritual world, the spiritual world, where the kind of the bottom line of the spiritual world is Vaikuntha, the world where there's no anxiety. Just think of this world now. The only way we can survive for another day is to really put out of our minds all of the crazy things that are going on and the threats. I mean, climate change? They're not really addressing climate change. Notice how the climate keeps changing? I mean, I've been here for 33 years now, 34 years, and the climate has changed. We've never had this long stretch of cold weather here in San Diego. There would be sometimes, sub 50 for a day or two, but then it would go up to 60, 70 like that. Not this winter.
And raining.
And the rain, extra rain, yeah. Long, of course, rain, that's okay. Don't. But the point is, and the forest fires over here, and the drought, and the, now even, I'm not going to attribute the earthquake to climate change. I'm not, but the hurricanes, and long-term problems with water supply and all these different things. The Arctic is melting. If there isn't that ice that's shining the sun back in, then that water is going to get much warmer when the sun comes in. So all this is happening. That's one problem. We've got imminent war going on. So there's no real security here. All you can do is kind of put it out of your mind and try to get some relief. But that's foolishness. We should really say, yes, this is the nature of the material world. I don't want to stay here. Why should I stay here and go through again birth, old age, disease, and death? Birth, old age, disease, and death. This is the circle, a cycle of samsara that the Buddhists talk about, and anyone who's in we all have to suffer that. We have suffered it. So how can we break free of that? We have to be situated in our spiritual identity, in our spiritual body. And bhakti-yoga helps us to develop that understanding and finally be on that level. It may take more than one life, but we've already spent millions of lives wasted in trying to enjoy and coming back again and again to suffer. So that's the basic point, and Krishna will say in this verse, now the verse that we read today, those who are trying to, avyakta, to concentrate on the invisible, the unmanifested, you see, their path is dukkam, full of difficulty, for those who are embodied. Well, we're embodied. So what's the point of trying to do that when our ultimate goal and our ultimate place of peace and permanence is in relationship with the ultimately personal God in the variegated world? One of the sutras of the Vedanta Sutras is Anandamaya Abhyasat. that the absolute truth, personality of Godhead, is by nature blissful. If you were God, wouldn't you be always blissful? Why should I have, all right, it's time to be really depressed? No. It's always be happy. Of course. So we're part and parcel. Just like a drop of water in the ocean has the same little chemical. It's also salty, right? So we're like sun rays of the brilliant sun. So we're also anandamaya vyasat. By nature, we're blissful. But let's face it, we're not always blissful now. We haven't even know what absolute bliss really is. We have, some happiness with sense pleasures. That's undeniable. But you have to be careful, because if you try to do it too much, it's going to cause a lot of pain. And even if you're very moderate, if that's what your focus is, then you're going to come back again to a material body, and that's automatically suffering. So the best and wisest solution is to learn the science and art. And it's not complicated. It's built on this chanting. And Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. That's the highest yoga, what I just did. But it should be done under the guidance of a qualified guru. And Srila Prabhupada was qualified guru. I'm fortunate to be a direct disciple of Srila Prabhupada. But he also trained others who can take that role, and all over the world we have. And we have like at least 100,000 initiated members now by this time, I think. Close to that. And so anyway, the books are here, the practice is here. You're welcome to come and take part in the programs. After this little class at 8:15, we'll have an RT. Prabhupada talks about the deity here. Now this is something that can be very confusing, because yes, it's a statue. He's a statue. He made of stone, But because of the worship and the mantras that have been chanted, the installation, and God can actually, we can relate to God through this deity form here. And we have, going to Thai, I won't get into explaining that, another form of God. And so we have regular programs here. Yes, there are austerities that's necessary for purification. Tapasya is called, for purification. And one of the austerities, the most difficult at first, is getting up early. Really early. Oh my God, 4 o'clock. Because that early time of the day is the most conducive for spiritual practice. The mind is calmer, there's not so much going on, you don't have to be at work right now, whatever. And so that's part of the regulation, early, the regulations in eating and all different things. Because we're trying to train ourselves not to be so absorbed in bodily concerns and bodily desires, but rather to link our senses to the Supreme. Beginning with the ear, the voice, then by seeing we can taste the prasadam. After the arti, if you want to hang around till 8:15 and participate, we'll have some spiritual food that you can eat, vegetarian food. That also is a way of relating to God and purification, called prasadam. We're famous for that. And so all the senses, the eyes by seeing the deity, the ears, of course, by hearing, and tongue by chanting, hands, you're welcome to come into the kitchen and help wash the pots, if you're interested, In other words, every sense can be linked up to Krishna, purified. And so the body becomes your friend, not your enemy. It says, oh, I got to have this, got to have this. Oh, I haven't smoked my cigarette today. It's amazing to me that they're still selling cigarettes. I mean, I was around when they put that notice on the pack in the early 60s, I think it was. Smoking cigarettes is hazardous to your health. Okay, well, no, who's going to buy the pack? Oh no, these people are addicted to cigarettes. All right, maybe it won't happen to me. But that's what material life is that these forces of the senses, because we have to get some enjoyment, you do things that you probably know aren't good for you. It may be just like, taking that third scoop of ice cream. We had in the lecture last night, he was talking about that. I know that it's probably good. Oh, it's so good. This is my favorite flavor. So I'll try it. Oh, I got a stomachache. So that's what's true of any kind of sense gratification. If that's your level of pleasure, that's all you're getting, then it's a trap. because it just plants more and more desire in your mind. And when you find the body finally breaks down and dies, those desires are there. Part of what doesn't die when your body, the external body dies, is called the subtle body. We all have it. A mind. Is anyone going to deny they have a mind here? I can't see it, but we all know it. An intelligence, discriminating factor, right? And also the most subtle is the ego, the sense of self. All of us have that. That does not die when the external body dies. That contains the template for your next body. All those unfulfilled desires. It's a science. Yes, it's subtle science, but it's true. I mean, anyway, I worked in a hospital, and I saw many people die, and some people almost die. And it's, you know, I mean, it's just, it's tragic, really. You know, you see, because you put your hopes, all the hopes in material future, but ultimately it's all dashed. It's ignorance, due to ignorance of the reality. The reality is, none of us die. I have this little poem. Everybody dies means every single body dies. Everybody dies, nobody dies. Wake up and open your eyes. You're not that body, you're pure spirit soul. Chant the holy name and attain life's goal. And it's been proved generation after generation that it works. All right, I'm going to stop haranguing you now and ask if there's any discussion or questions. Because I see there's a lot of new people here. Okay. Yeah, just get the mic. We have you people on YouTube, so use the mic.
Krishna.
Haribol, Arjun.
You mentioned that the self remains the same even though the body is growing, like baby and now old and stuff. I recently learned from the Prabhu who's traveling from the Russian Prabhu. He's based out of Vrindavan. I don't know his name. Okay. He's been giving lectures lately.
What's his name again?
I forgot his name.
Oh, Gaurasundar.
Gaurasundar.
Okay.
He mentioned that our real age, the soul's age, is around 15 years, few days old.
Our real what?
Our 15 years old. Our consciousness, the soul, the self, it doesn't grow after that.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So even he was mentioning the Krishna's age is also stays
around
15-ish. Yeah.
Okay.
That was a new lesson I learned.
It's interesting because that's about how old I feel, even though I'm about 75. Maybe it's, you know.
So that's why I guess we say, we always stay young by heart. So that's maybe we could relate to that.
No, actually you can see that in Srila Prabhupada, even in his late 70s, he wasn't, because I mean, old people, it's hard to not stay, be depressed because everything is moving toward death. You can't do this anymore. But Prabhupada was never discouraged, even though his health, he had health issues, obviously. But he was always in that very enthusiastic spirit. And amazingly, and even though he was so, didn't feel well, he would preach, he would give the lesson because he knew people needed it. He traveled all over the world, even at age 70 and 80, So that's, Krishna gives you energy and enthusiasm, even though the body is not cooperating as much anymore, Whereas on the material plane, it's like, oh, I can't do this anymore, That's a tragedy, because that's been your frame of reference for success and pleasure. But if you link up to Krishna, then even in great difficulty, you could still feel transcendental pleasure, because it's not on the material platform. It's not coming but from the senses, and it works like that. Thank you, Arjun. Any other discussion? Okay, and back at the end, Antonella, if you could hand the mic down. Hello, yeah.
I know when you talk about material, of course I know material, what's material, but if someone had to ask me explain definition of material, I would have to find the words. So could you just give me your definition of material?
Material means unconscious. In the 7th chapter, Krishna starts his lesson on practical devotional service, basically, And he lists the basic elements that we all live with. Bhuma, Apa, Olanavaya, earth, water, fire, air, ether, space, mind, intelligence, and ego, progressively more subtle. None of them are conscious. You know, this desk, this table is not going to object if I hit it. So that's it. The unconscious elements that we're surrounded with, that's matter. And spirit is consciousness. And the nature of spirit is eternal and to be full of bliss. We are Sat Chit Ananda, because that's Krishna's nature. That's God's nature. Eternal, full of bliss, full of knowledge. But we've lost that because we're minute, so we can be covered by the material energy. And we misidentify ourselves as part of the material energy. But we're not. We ourselves are not. And that's waking up from that illusion is a big part of becoming Krishna conscious. Because it means that the body itself obviously is temporary. But it can be spiritualized when it's used in the service of Krishna. Just like the ears, you can hear so many things, but if you're not hearing transcendental sound vibration, you know, that's related to God and Krishna and all of this, then that's further binding you to this world. All kinds of music, you know, or music that really, you know, doesn't uplift you, and for devotees it's no thank you, you know. So that's the material energy is very powerful. Daivayesha gunamahi mamamaya andurachaya. Krishna says, this is my energy. It's divine, therefore. And unless you surrender to me directly, you cannot cross beyond it. You can go from one material situation to another and think you made improvement, but you're still bound up. And you're going to get another material body. And does anyone really want to be reborn and be part of this world? I don't see it. It's going to take a miracle. Of course, it could happen. That the world is not going to get into a very, very difficult situation in a short time. Because what are they really doing about the climate change? They're just fighting over the oil and burning fossil fuels like anything. It's not, you know, it seems impossible. I may be wrong. I mean, Krishna can do anything. But it's a very difficult time, and we don't have to stay here. We can develop our spiritual nature and spiritual body and make this our last birth. That's what Prabhupada said from the beginning. Go back home, back to Godhead. Don't linger here. We're all aliens here. We don't belong here. This isn't our home. You know, we make so many compromises so we can try to get a little comfort here, but it's all temporary. I mean, these things, I'm repeating what all the great, we call them acharyas, the line of realized souls who've come down and given us this knowledge. I'm just repeating it. But I've also felt, you know, the benefits of Krishna consciousness all these years. You know. Hare Krishna. Oh, the mic. We have another mic. What happened to it? Oh, there it is, right behind you. Yeah, and then we have to adjourn.
So, Prabhuji, when you said material, you're saying it from a practical point of view, is it? Or you're saying it from an absolute point of view?
What matter is?
When you're defining the term material, what you said just now.
I'm just quoting Krishna. Apara prakati.
No, but in some ways, because even in matter, there is Paramatma, right? So he is conscious.
Yeah.
So are you talking from
within the atom? Yeah.
Yes. So
sustaining.
So.
But the desk itself is not conscious. In other words, there's an element here of dead matter that's really not conscious. So yes, the whole thing is being held together and sustained by the presence of the super soul in every atom.
We are not able to sense it. We are not able to sense Paramatma in the atoms, right? But
right.
You cannot say it's dead. Technically, you cannot say it's dead because he is conscious. We are not able to perceive him.
I think you're overthinking it.
Yeah. So that's why I'm trying to say.
You see, the earth. I mean, this floor. It's not. It's not going to complain if I jump up and down on it. You know, but if I happen to hit your toe, you're in there, and the conscious energy is there, and you can sense the pain, and therefore you'll object.
So basically, you're saying that whichever is not a jivatma, that is
no
matter.
Yeah, that's the difference.
So
There's
that's
no
what you're
jivatma
saying.
who's the jiva of this table. Okay, one little sweet poem. Let's see. Okay, so this is a meditation on Krishna as he enters the forest of Vrindavan. It's part of the book. Barhapidam natavadavapu karanayo karanikaram bibradvasa kanakakapisham vaijayanting chamalam randranveno adadasudeya purihan gopa vrinda vrindaranyam swapatanamanam prabhishad gita kirti. With lovely peacock plume upon his head and fragrant flower placed upon each ear, he enters Braja's woods with graceful tread, a handsome dancing actor without peer. His golden yellow raiment brightly glows, his splendid garland reaches to his knees, and from his luscious lips the nectar flows and fills his flute with charming melodies. As Krishna thus begins his blissful day with cowherd friends who sing his glories sweet, he beautifies Vrindavan's forest way with fine impressions of his lotus feet. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol.